The morning Elaine Bouchard nearly got fired for making tourtière, the temperature outside the Harlow Tower had already dropped to -22. She hadn't planned to cook anything. She never did, not at work. But the thermos of soup she'd packed had cracked somewhere on the bus ride from Verdun, soaking through her canvas bag and ruining the only paperback she'd been reading for 3 weeks. By 11 o'clock her hands were still cold, her coat was damp, and she had 4 more hours of pushing a cleaning cart through the 42nd floor before she could go home. So she reheated the tourtière in the staff microwave on the 14th floor. Just 2 minutes, just enough to take the chill off. She didn't think anyone would smell it. The Harlow Tower was the kind of building that didn't put its name on anything criminal. That was the point. 47 floors of steel and glass, overlooking the St. Lawrence, home to a private equity firm, a law office that specialized in maritime contracts, and on the 39th floor, behind a door with no nameplate, the operational center of the Harlow Syndicate, the most quietly powerful organized crime network east of Toronto. Its head was a man named Edouard Voss, 51 years old, 6'2", born in Trois-Rivières to a mechanic father and a woman who had cooked every meal from scratch until the day she died. He had spent 30 years building something his father would not have understood and his mother would not have forgiven. And he did it all from an office that smelled like leather and cold air and nothing else, because that was how he preferred it. He was not sentimental. He had trained himself out of it the way you train yourself out of flinching. But that morning, walking down from 39 to use the private stairwell because the elevator was being serviced, he passed the 14th floor landing and stopped so suddenly that the 2 men behind him nearly walked into his back. He didn't move. He stood in the stairwell doorway with his hand on the metal bar and breathed in very slowly, like a man trying to remember something that had been gone so long he'd stopped looking for it. Pork, thyme, savory, the particular sweetness of onion cooked down until it dissolves, the way pastry smells when it's been reheated and the fat in the crust starts to melt again. His mother had called it the smell of January. Sir, one of his men, a quiet one named Patrice, spoke carefully. Everything all right? Edouard did not answer right away. He pushed through the stairwell door into the 14th floor corridor and followed his nose the way he hadn't followed anything in years. Without strategy, without calculation, with something raw and animal and so old he couldn't name it. He found her in the staff kitchen at the end of the hall. She had her back to him. She was standing at the counter in a blue cleaning uniform that pulled slightly at the shoulders, her dark hair pinned up in a bun that was losing its shape, a plastic container open in front of her. She was eating standing up, which meant she either didn't have long or had learned long ago not to take up space. She didn't hear him come in. She was humming something low under her breath, not a song he recognized, just a rhythm, the kind people hum when they're alone and they think they're safe. Where did you get that? She spun around so fast her elbow knocked the container and he caught it before it hit the floor, a reflex, nothing more. She pressed herself back against the counter with her hand on her chest, eyes wide, face flushed. I made it, she said. I'm sorry, I know we're not supposed to use the kitchen for. I'll clean it up right now. I didn't think the smell would. You made it. She blinked. Yes. He looked at the container in his hand. Golden brown pastry crust, still steaming slightly. The filling inside, he could see it through the broken edge where her fork had been. Dark and fine-ground and fragrant in a way that made his chest ache with something he had no language for. This is tourtière, he said. She stared at him like she was trying to figure out whether she was in trouble. Yes, she said again, more carefully this time. Where did you learn the recipe? She glanced at Patrice standing in the doorway, then back at the man in front of her, the expensive coat, the stillness, the way the other men arranged themselves around him without being told. She wasn't stupid. She'd cleaned this building for 2 years. She knew what floor he came from. "My grandmother," she said. "She lived in St. Hyacinthe. She made it every January." Edouard set the container down on the counter very gently. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her, not the way men usually looked at Elaine Bouchard, which was either through her or past her, but directly, the way you look at something you're trying to understand. "What's your name?" he said. "Elaine." "Elaine Bouchard." He nodded once, like he was filing it away. Then he turned and walked out. She told herself it was nothing. A strange man had asked about her food. It happened. It meant nothing. She finished her shift. She took the 107 bus back to Verdun. She bought a new thermos at the Dollarama on Wellington and went to bed early because she had a 6 a.m. start the next morning. 3 days later, a woman in a charcoal blazer appeared at the cleaning services desk on the ground floor and asked for Elaine Bouchard by name. Elaine was called down from the 22nd floor. She arrived with her cart, rubber gloves still on, a smear of something on her left sleeve. "We'd like to offer you a reassignment," the woman said. Without preamble, without warmth, in the tone of someone delivering information rather than an offer. "Floor 39. Personal assistant to the private office. The pay is 4 times your current hourly." Elaine pulled off one rubber glove very slowly. "I'm a cleaning staff," she said. "You'd be trained." "For what?" The woman looked at her with polite, total blankness. "Scheduling, correspondence, discretion." Elaine looked down at the rubber glove in her hand. She thought about her apartment in Verdun. The one with the radiator that clanged all night, and the bathroom tile that was cracking along the grout, and the envelope on her kitchen counter with her brother's name on it, the one she'd been adding $20 to every week for 8 months, because he needed a lawyer and she was the only one left who gave a damn. "All right," she said. "When do I start?" The 39th floor was nothing like the rest of the building. Everything was quieter, the carpet was thicker, the air was different, not recycled somehow, though she couldn't explain how. There were no nameplates anywhere, no directories, no company logos, just a series of closed doors and men who moved like they had memorized every exit in the room. The woman in the charcoal blazer. Her name was Denise, and she spoke in complete sentences and full stops and nothing else. Showed Elaine her desk, which sat outside the main office like a checkpoint. Showed her the phone system, the calendar software, the filing protocol. Told her what to log and what not to log, and made very clear, without ever saying it directly, that the distinction between those two categories was the most important skill she would ever develop in this building. Elaine learned fast. She always had. She'd had to. She'd grown up in Longueuil, the oldest of 4, with a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who had been gone so long he'd become more concept than person. She had been the one who made dinner, helped with homework, called the landlord, negotiated payment plans, filled out the forms. She had become competent the way people become competent when there is no one else to be competent for them. She wasn't intimidated by Edouard Voss. She was careful around him, the way you're careful around something with significant force. Not afraid of it, just respectful of what it could do. He barely spoke to her the first 2 weeks. He took his calls behind the closed door. He came and went at hours that didn't correspond to any schedule she could identify. He had 3 men who were always near him. Patrice, who was quiet. A larger man called Sébastien, who was not. And a 3rd one, younger, who she learned was named Joël and who had the eyes of someone who had seen too much too early and made peace with it. She did her job. She managed the calendar. She learned which calls to put through and which to say he wasn't available. She made coffee at 7:30 every morning because no one had told her to, but she'd noticed the empty cups and drawn the obvious conclusion. On her 3rd week, she found him in the small kitchen adjacent to the main office at 7:15, standing in front of the espresso machine like it had personally disappointed him. "The pressure gauge is off," she said, coming in past him to get the coffee filters. "It's been making everything bitter." I ordered a replacement part. It'll be here Thursday. He turned and looked at her. How did you know? He said. I tasted it, she said simply. First morning. Figured it wasn't intentional. There was a pause. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just a degree or two, like a door opening slightly. My mother said you could always taste when a machine was tired, he said. It came out sounding like he hadn't meant to say it. Elaine didn't make anything of it. She just said she sounds like she knew what she was talking about, and got the filters and left. She didn't know at first the full shape of what she'd walked into. She understood that it wasn't a legal business. She wasn't naive, but the specifics came to her gradually, the way cold does. Not all at once, but incrementally, until one morning you realize you are much deeper in than you thought, and the distance back to the door is longer than you remember. It was a Thursday in February when Joelle came to her desk at 11 o'clock at night. She'd been working late on a documentation backlog, and sat down across from her with the expression of someone about to say something they'd been told not to say. You understand what happens in this office, he said. Not a question. I understand enough, she said. And you're still here. She looked at him steadily. I'm still here. He was quiet for a moment. He wants you to know. He stopped. Started again. He doesn't say things directly, you've probably noticed. He wants you to know that if you want to leave, the door is open, and if you stay, you'll be taken care of. Those are the two options. There isn't a third. She thought about the envelope on her kitchen counter. She thought about her brother, who was 22, and had made one bad decision, and was now caught in the machinery of something much larger than one decision. I know, she said. I'm staying. Joelle nodded. Then he said, unexpectedly, he asked me to tell you that the replacement part for the espresso machine works. He says the coffee is better. She almost laughed. She stopped herself, but he saw it, and the corner of his mouth moved. He also said to tell you. Joelle hesitated again. He said to say thank you. He doesn't usually say that. Spring came late that year. The St. Lawrence was still carrying ice in April, and the city had that grey, exhausted look it gets when winter has overstayed by a month. But on the 39th floor, things had shifted in ways Elaine couldn't have predicted and didn't entirely understand. Edouard had started leaving the office door open in the mornings. It was a small thing. Probably no one else noticed. But she noticed because she noticed everything. Because that was what she did. And she noticed that when the door was open, he spoke slightly differently. Not louder, not warmer exactly, but less compressed. Like a house when you finally open a window after a long winter. He had started asking her opinions on things, not personal things, practical things, whether a particular meeting should be shortened, whether a certain contact was worth the time, whether the new filing structure Denise had proposed actually made sense or just looked organized. She gave him her honest assessments, the way she gave her honest assessments about everything, which was directly and without performance. He seemed to find this remarkable. She found it strange that he found it remarkable. Most people tell you what you want to hear, she asked him one morning, when he'd asked what she thought about a particular arrangement, and then looked almost startled when she said she thought it was unnecessarily complicated. Yes, he said. That must be exhausting, she said, not knowing what's real. He was quiet for long enough that she thought she'd overstepped. Then he said, It is. She went back to her desk, but the door stayed open. It was Patrice who told her about the mother. He didn't mean to. They were in the elevator together in late April. Patrice going down to the parking level, Elaine going to the lobby for a lunch she'd finally started taking outside now that the weather was turning. And he said, out of nowhere, the way people say things in elevators when they've been holding them for too long. You reminded him of her, you know. The first day, the tourtière. Elaine looked at him. Her name was Céline, Patrice said, looking at the elevator doors. She died 11 years ago, breast cancer. He was with her at the end. He doesn't talk about it, but the food she made. Tourtière every January, like you said. He hadn't smelled that since she died, because he never let anyone cook it around him. He paused, and then you did. In the staff kitchen on the 14th floor. He exhaled. He stood in that stairwell for almost 2 minutes. I've worked for him for 16 years. I have never seen him stand still like that. The elevator opened. Patrice walked out to the parking level without looking at her. Elaine stood in the elevator for a moment, before the doors started to close, and she put her hand out to stop them. She thought about a woman named Céline in Saint-Hyacinthe or somewhere like it, making tourtière in January, with her hands that knew the recipe, the way hands know things without measuring, without thinking, from somewhere deeper than memory. She thought about her own grandmother, who had been the same way. She took her lunch outside and sat on a bench near the river and ate her sandwich and watched the last of the ice go by. In May, her brother's case was resolved. She hadn't asked Edouard for help. She hadn't mentioned it. She had kept the 2 parts of her life completely separate, the way she kept everything, private, contained, managed. But somehow, and she didn't ask how, and she understood clearly that not asking was its own kind of transaction. The lawyer who had been unavailable for 8 months became available. The charge was reduced. The outcome was the one she had been adding $20 a week toward, except it arrived all at once, and her brother came home on a Thursday, and she cried in the bathroom on the 39th floor for 6 minutes, and then washed her face and went back to her desk. Edouard said nothing when she came out, but there was a coffee on her desk, made the way she took it, which she had never told him, and that was how she knew. She sat down, she drank the coffee, she opened the calendar. After a moment she said, without looking up, "Thank you." From behind the open door he said, "You would have gotten there, with or without it." She didn't answer, but she thought maybe, and also he hadn't had to. The Chambertin Gala was the kind of event that existed to remind certain people exactly where they stood in a hierarchy that politely pretended not to exist. Held every June in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom on Sherbrooke, attended by old money and new money, and the kind of money that didn't have an adjective. It was the social centerpiece of a world that Elaine had previously only ever cleaned around the edges of. She found out she was attending when a black garment bag appeared in the small office adjacent to her desk on the 2nd Monday of June, with a notocard attached that said only, June 14th. 8 o'clock. In Edouard's handwriting, which she recognized by now, angular, economical, no flourishes. She opened the garment bag. The dress was the deep green of spruce trees in December, floor length, simple in the way that very expensive things are simple. No decoration, just cut and fabric, and the understanding that the body underneath was enough. It fit her exactly. She didn't ask how he knew her size, because she was learning that asking how in this world was less important than understanding why. She called her brother that evening. "You're going to a gala," he said, apparently. A pause. "Are you scared?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I'm not sure what I am. That's different from scared," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." She walked into the Ritz-Carlton ballroom on June 14th at 7:58, in the green dress, with her hair down for the first time since September, and the room did what rooms do when someone enters it who doesn't belong to its vocabulary. It paused, fractionally, and recalibrated. Edouard was standing near the east wall with 3 men she recognized and 2 she didn't. He was wearing a dark suit that fit the way his suits always fit, like a second skin, and he was in the middle of saying something to the man on his left when he saw her. He stopped talking. The man on his left waited. Patrice noticed, because Patrice always noticed, and looked at Elaine, and then looked back at Edouard with the carefully neutral expression of someone who has been doing this job for 16 years and knows exactly what they're seeing. Edouard crossed the room. Not quickly, deliberately, the way he moved through every space, like he had decided in advance that it belonged to him. "You look exactly like yourself," he said when he reached her. It was, she would think later, the strangest compliment she had ever received, and the most accurate. "Is that good?" she said. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. She didn't smile, but something in her chest loosened, the way things loosen when you've been holding them a long time and someone finally gives you permission to set them down. He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked into the room together, and the room, after its brief pause, resumed around them. Because that was what rooms did when Edouard Voss decided something. No one asked who she was. That was the thing about being with a man like this. The questions answered themselves. But across the room, she saw the woman in the charcoal blazer, Denise, who had offered her the job 4 months ago in the voice of someone delivering information. And Denise looked at her with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite approval, but something in between, something that in another woman might have been respect. Elaine held Edouard's arm and looked straight ahead and thought about her grandmother's kitchen in St. Hyacinthe, the January cold pressing against the windows, the smell of pork and thyme and savory filling the house all the way up the stairs. Some things you carry without knowing, and then one day someone else recognizes what you're carrying, and the weight of it changes. Not lighter, exactly. Just shared. She stayed until midnight. She danced once, badly, and he didn't comment on it. She ate everything on her plate, and he noticed, and didn't comment on that either, which was its own kind of statement. When they left, Patrice brought the car around, and Edouard walked her to the door and said, in the matter-of-fact tone he used for most things, "My mother would have liked you." Elaine looked at him in the cold June air, the city spread out around them, indifferent and enormous and full of people who would never know what happened on the 39th floor. "Tell me about her sometime," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The car was waiting. The night was getting colder. "All right," he said. "Sometime." She got in the car. He closed the door himself, which she'd noticed he always did, as if closing doors was something he preferred to control. She watched him through the window as the car pulled away, standing on the steps of the Ritz, hands in his coat pockets, looking after the car with an expression she didn't have a word for yet. She would learn the word eventually. She was patient. She had always been patient. The car moved through the Montreal night, crossing the city from old money to Verdun, from the world of closed doors and careful silences back to the apartment, with the clanging radiator and the Dollarama thermos and the cracked bathroom tiles that she would fix herself in the spring because that was what she did. She fixed things, one at a time, without waiting for someone else to notice they were broken. But tonight the radiator could clang. Tonight her brother was home. Tonight a man who had not spoken his mother's name in 11 years had said it to her in a parquetred stairwell, without intending to, because she had reheated a tourtière in the staff kitchen on the 14th floor, and the smell had found him before he could decide whether to let it. Elaine Bouchard leaned her head against the car window and watched the city go by, and allowed herself, for exactly the length of the drive home, to feel the full weight of the evening without diminishing any of it. Then the car stopped on her street in Verdun, and she thanked the driver by name. She always learned the driver's name, and got out into the cold and walked up to her apartment and made herself a tea and sat at the kitchen table in the green dress for a little while, just to keep the night company before it ended.